trainees, and welcome to my podcast, where we dive into effective communication strategies for marine conservation. I'm your host, Anna, and today we're focusing on the stunning Gulf of California, a biodiversity hotspot facing overfishing and habitat loss. In this episode, we'll explore three key takeaways from the insightful Jan's podcast on narrative persuasion, and I'll show you how to apply them when chatting with local IAPs like local fishermen and indigenous communities. Let's make conservation conversations stick. Let's dive in. First takeaway from the Jan's episode. Stories are more convincing than raw facts because they pull people in to an emotional world with relatable characters and stakes, reducing pushback and sparking real attitude shifts. Even fictional ones work through immersion. This flips the script on dry data dumps, highlighting how narratives build empathy over logic alone. For applying this to marine conservation in the Gulf, consider local fishing communities, who are low to middle income folks deeply tied to artisanal traditions and vulnerable to declining fish stocks. Their values center on livelihoods and fair access. So weave in personal tales that honor their ocean's knowledge without threatening their income. Let's talk about a hypothetical scenario. New and old fishermen are skeptical of seasonal closures. You tell a story of a grandfather who remembers when the bay was so full of fish you could almost walk across the water. Then explain how a few tough seasons of closures allowed his grandson to keep the family boat running instead of selling it. You end with, "This isn't about losing a season. It's about making sure your kids still have a reason to launch from this dock and provide for their future." Now stop and think about their future. What would they do if there aren't any fish left? Now, our second gem from Jan's, immersing audiences in a story's world can subtly shift beliefs as the brain blurs fiction and reality, making abstract ideas feel personal and urgent. It's about the psychological of transport. Getting lost in the narrative lowers defenses, unlike lectures that trigger resistance. The episode stresses this work best with vivid, stake-filled tales over abstract info. So tailor this for indigenous people like the Seri and Yaqui in the Gulf, who hold deep spiritual ties to the sea and prioritize cultural survival alongside small-scale harvesting. Their stewardship values demand respect for traditional knowledge, so immerse them in narratives that echo their worldview, avoiding top-down lectures. Picture this scenario. You're consulting with a Seri elder on co-managing a protected area near their territory. Rather than explaining biodiversity laws, immerse her with, envision the ancient spirits of the sea guiding your ancestors' sustainable hunts. Today, by limiting trawlers, we keep those waters alive for your children's ceremonies, just as the old stories promised. This technique considers their marginalized socioeconomic status and high support for inclusive solutions, turning policy into a cultural continuation. Now, our third takeaway. The podcast's easygoing tone and pop culture hooks, like starting with familiar stories, make complex psych research feel approachable and memorable, using interviews for plain language clarity. It teaches that conservational formats with early vivid examples beats dense facts, helping info stick through relatability. When targeting tourism operators in the Gulf, think eco-tour guides and dive shops that rely on healthy reefs for income. Factor in their mix of local and global identities and priorities like long-term site quality. They value charismatic species but need practical rules, so keep chats lively and tied to their business realities. In a hypothetical chat, you meet with a dive shop owner whose income depends on healthy reefs and megafauna. An example. 10 years ago, a small dive shop in Cabo Pulmo was struggling because the nearby reef had been overfished, and guests started complaining that there was nothing to see. After the community agreed to a strict no-take rule and tour operators adopted mooring buoys instead of anchoring, the reef slowly came back to life with huge schools of fish and regular shark and turtle sightings. Now today, that same shop is booked out in peak season, and they call it the comeback reef. And the owners tell new guides that protecting the reef is exactly what saved their business and brought them glowing reviews. Trainees, wrapping it up, just remember, in the Gulf of California's vital waters, Narrative persuasion turns conservation from a chore into a shared adventure. Practice these takeaways: stories for pull, immersion for depth, and chatty vibes for connection to engage IEPs effectively. Tune in next time for more tips. Thanks for listening.